Okay, chapter 34 is on the deuterostomes. With the deuterostomes, these include the animals such as echinoderms and the cephalochordates, the hemichordates, and the urochordates and the true chordates. So we talked about in this chapter, all of the animals within the deuterostomes, remember, share a common developmental plan from the 8-cell stage onward. So they're kind of a fairly closely related group of animals, or set of phyla. Um, these are a group of animals that generally have an endoskeleton. We see an endoskeleton in the echinoderms, made out of calcium carbonate. In the echinoderms, we also see that water vascular system that's used both as a true vascular system, but also for movement and for feeding. Remember the tube feet that we looked at with the starfish. Okay. In the in the cephalochordate and urochordate and chordate lineage, remember we also talked about some key characteristics that we see with all those groups, including the notochord and the postanal tail and the pharyngeal gills and the pharyngeal gill slits and the dorsal hollow nerve tube. So those are four traits that we see in development, at least in some developmental stage of all of those types of animals. We see the urochordates. Remember, these are the tunicates, and remember that we see those traits in the larval form of the urochordates. But then, as the urochordate goes through metamorphosis and settles, it becomes a sessile animal, and we see the loss of some of those traits, such as the tail and the notochord. Remember also what the adaptive advantage of that notochord is, as well as the adaptive advantage of the dorsal hollow nerve tube and the tail for swimming. So the notochord kind of serves as a point of attachment for muscles. So we're talking about animals with a fairly strong muscular tail that are able to swim effectively. Remember the gill slits we talked about, which are adaptations primarily or initially for feeding, secondarily as a respiratory organ. So we see those traits in all of the groups we're talking about here. The cephalochordates, the urochordates, and the true chordates or vertebrates. We also talked about as we get into the vertebrates, we talked about some modifications of that basic body plan. So one of the things we see with the cephalochordates is they fail to go through metamorphosis, and so you end up with paedomorphic traits. So juvenile or larval type traits persist into adulthood. And so with the cephalochordate, you've got an animal that looks kind of like a fish. When we get into the vertebrates, we again see some of those same characteristics, except the notochord becomes replaced by vertebrae, and the vertebrae then encase that dorsal hollow nerve tube, which becomes the spinal canal, okay, or the spinal nerve. The pharyngeal gills, when we look at fish, the pharyngeal gill slits, they become more important in terms of respiration, and so we see gill arches as part of initially a cartilaginous skeleton that helps to support and separate a large number of tissues, the ventilatory tissues. Those gill arches then are pre-adaptations. They actually give rise to the jaws. So the jaws evolve from the third and fourth gill arch. Now with the evolution of the jaw, that increases the number of food resources that fish can eat. And so soon after we see a jaw, we see a rapid explosion, kind of a rapid diversification of different fishes. Okay. We also in this chapter talked about the amniotic egg and the the advantages of the amniotic egg in terms of reproduction on land. We talked about evolution of the forelimbs and the ability to support weight on land as an adaptive trait. We talked about placental animals, and so basically taking that amniotic egg and using some of those same layers, some of the same membrane layers, but an adaptation that allows for development of the placenta, so the animal can be carried to a greater state of maturity before it's born. In this chapter, we also talked about the different lineages of vertebrates. So we talked about a couple of different groups of fish and their key traits, the reptiles and their primary traits, amphibians. We talked about the importance of the swim bladder as a pre-adaptation for internal respiration or a primitive lung. We talked about adaptations to a drier climate and how reptiles have two adaptations, three key adaptations that allow them to live in a drier climate than amphibians. They have scales, which protect the skin from drying out. Now, remember, amphibians use their skin as a respiratory organ, so to compensate for the loss of the skin as a respiratory organ when you have scales, reptiles have a better developed lung. Okay, so they've taken that amphibian lung and we see an enhancement of surface area. Another trait that we see in the reptiles is internal fertilization with the amniotic egg. Sorry, I'm losing my train. So yeah, I mean those are the keys, right? Internal fertilization, development of an amniotic egg, the ability to allows the animal to reproduce on dry land and find dry land. Now I'm rambling. We also talked a little bit about birds and mammals. Birds are, remember, one of the members of the reptilian lineage. They have a lot of reptilian traits, but one thing that we see within the birds that's novel is modification of the scales as feathers. Probably initially as a mating display, but then as a pre-adaptation for some other traits that we see. So including flight, including warmth. We also see in that group the evolution of homeothermy. We see that same trait evolve in the mammals, so we see homeothermy in the mammals. We also see some other traits that are characteristic of mammals, including the mammary glands, production of milk, a movement with the monotremes, which are egg-laying, to the marsupials, which give birth to immature young, to the true placental or euplacental mammals, which give birth to babies which are in pretty advanced state of development.